My name is Terrence Barkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Graphene Council and the Advanced Carbons Council, which was recently launched to cover not just graphene, but all allotropes of advanced carbons, and you'll hear a little bit about that today. We are the host of the session, this webinar being presented by General Graphene with three excellent presenters, with Siddhant Bangur and Michael Stanford from General Graphene Corporation and Srivastava Atal from Hememics Biotechnologies. The Advanced Carbons Council is an international trade association that works with both the producers and the users of advanced carbon materials. And if you have any questions about any of these materials and would like to learn more, we invite you to visit our website. We will send you a link in the follow-up email to that. And with that, I would like to introduce Siddhant Bangur as our lead speaker for today. They will take you through the session, and once the presentation is completed, we'll have a question and answer period. Please use the Q&A dialog box to write your questions. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And gentlemen, we're really eager to hear what you have to say about CVD production, graphene, and beyond.
Thank you, Terrence, for organizing this session and for everyone who was able to get on. My name is Siddhant Bangur. And I have with me Michael Stanford, my colleague at General Graphene Corporation. And we have Sri from Hememics, who's been a wonderful collaborator of ours. And today, what we're really here to talk about is the advancements that we've made on the chemical vapor deposition, or the CVD, route of synthesizing graphene, and how we've been able to use that process to not just make graphene, but other carbon nanomaterials. So I want to start off by talking about what is graphene. Fundamentally, the very simple concept of defining graphene is it's nothing more than a single atom layer of carbon, which is arranged in a hexagonal lattice structure, similar to how chicken wire would look. Graphene is really classified in two types. There's the top-down graphene, which is produced from processes like mechanical exfoliation, liquid phase exfoliation, and most often you have graphite as the source material, and your output is going to be something similar to a black powder or a brown powder. So really a particulate form of graphene. On the flip side of the equation, you have bottom-up graphene, which is what our discussion today will be focusing on. Really, two routes there would be chemical vapor deposition, which is the crux of our talk today, and then epitaxial growth on semiconducting substrates. And on this particular route, you have gaseous carbon precursors that are often the starting source material, and your output is going to be really a transparent film that's closer to the one atom thick definition of graphene. So brief history about graphene, of course, starting with, as most of you would be familiar, its discovery in 2004 at the University of Manchester. That really was the innovation and the spark of the innovation in this field. Moving more on to the CVD side of things, 2009 is really when the first ever CVD graphene was synthesized at UT Austin with the Rodney Ruoff group. And then 2014 is around the time when first few roll-to-roll demonstrations came to light with Purdue University and several other groups involved in those. And 2018, we saw this process being further refined and scaled by several research institutions. So really throughout this journey that graphene's been on, many people will associate the term wonder material, and where that comes from is this gap that graphene has in the theoretical and the real world properties. And this gap is what has ultimately driven the journey of graphene, as I mentioned, with the innovation sparking what was a peak of inflated expectations and hype in the field that ultimately drove a degree of disillusionment, and skepticism among users and producers even in the market. But thankfully, over the last few years, I think the whole field has bounced back collectively, and we can now say that we are on, the slope of enlightenment and heading closer to a plateau of productivity as an industry. So on the CVD side of things, there are a few realities that we've seen in the field. Since its first demonstration in 2009, the field has really seen a mix of fierce competition with a lot of bold business ideas and ventures coming about. These ultimately drove what were really optimistic and predictions and projections, which ultimately is what led to the disappointment and disillusionment which we described earlier. The reality is that, despite widespread research on large area graphene synthesis, practical applications are still not common, and commercialization is not just limited by price, but also by factors such as consistency, reproducibility, and predictability as far as the graphene material itself is concerned. So where has General Graphene been, and what has General Graphene's journey looked like in context to CVD? Really, we've been on what is a rather long and winding road that is focused on combining the science and engineering expertise behind making graphene and doing so at scale. This journey started with us being founded in 2015 and the first patent being filed, following which in 2016 and 17 we had our first big round of funding in the Series A round, and our second generation prototype being commissioned. Since then, we had a Series B. We're able to commission what is our current flagship production system, with the third generation production system, or GG30, being commissioned in 2021. And since then, our focus, we've had a Series C, and our focus has really been on alternative reactors and downstream processes such as roll-to-roll transfer. And ultimately, throughout all this process development, in the last year and a half, what we've really transitioned more towards is applications and focusing on developing materials and products for specific applications. What we can say about our company, that through this journey, we have managed to make the CVD graphene form of material scalable, accessible, and affordable, and that we're able to take our process and tune it to produce really novel carbon nanostructures that are tailored to achieve very specific critical performance attributes across a variety of applications. And on your screen there, you'll see some images of our various products, along with an after dark image of our production system. Our team, we have 17 employees, with some key personnel listed across the various departments we have, including science, engineering, production, and business development. And really what is unique about our team is we provide this blend of science and engineering in-house under the same roof to address your graphene specific needs. We have technical subject matter expertise on making graphene, but also in applying it for specific applications. And what our team has really been competent in is developing proprietary technology and having proven success and good track record in scaling up complex processes. So with that, I will now hand it off to Michael, who will touch on the technology side of our advancements at GG.
All right. Thanks, Siddhant. Mm-hmm. So my name is Michael Stanford. I'm the director of our science team here at General Graphene. And first, I wanted to touch on some of the technologies that we've developed, which we use in the production of our various products. So first, we have our roll-to-roll compatible CVD system that we use to primarily grow our flagship product, which would be monolayer graphene on copper. So this is a system compatible, producing in excess of 30,000 meters squared of monolayer graphene annually. However, it's largely driven by the appetite of our customers. So our largest product coming out of this is going to be in the sheet form of graphene on copper. Additionally, we've developed some auxiliary equipment to help process this graphene more downstream. One of these is a roll-to-roll graphene transfer system. And on this system, what the output is graphene on polymer, and then we can recollect our catalyst to actually reuse it. We've also developed some alternative systems like a rotating CVD reactor. This is something that we use for coating more complex three-dimensional objects. And typically, we're not using this as much for graphene as much as pyrolytic carbon films, which we'll touch on a little bit more later in this presentation. And then we've also designed some equipment like automated etching systems that we use for production of our graphene foam product, which Siddhant will touch on here in a bit. So first, I want to highlight some of the differences between our technology and some advantages that we have. So many people here, if you're familiar with CVD graphene, you'll be familiar with this equipment. These are CVD tube furnaces, and these certainly have their place in the field. These are off-the-shelf equipment, generally good for batch scale production. In general, you're going to have limited volume, and it's often not roll-to-roll compatible. These type of systems are easy to come by and easy to replicate, and they largely operate under vacuum. Although there are demonstrations of doing this in atmospheric pressure. Then we have our roll-to-roll compatible CVD system, and so this is customized equipment. It's really meant for large industrial scale production of monolayer graphene, producing at high volumes, roll-to-roll compatibility, as I mentioned. And this is something that we have, multiple patents to IP protect this technology, and it operates under atmospheric pressure. And so what's important about that is because of this, we can attach on other downstream processes on our line, like coating systems that you can use to coat the graphene as a protective layer or as a final substrate. So quickly, I want to touch a little bit on how we do quality control here at General Graphene, and I'm going to use the case study of our monolayer product. So first, we start with synthesis, obviously, and then we undergo our quality control. And so typically, we look at Raman spectroscopy. If you're familiar with the CVD Raman space or CVD graphene space, this is a really useful tool for monitoring defect density by extracting what they call the D to G ratio. We also do SEM images of our material. This helps us to visualize the coverage, estimate multilayer content, as well as some forms of defects. And then we do electrical testing. So typically, we'll be verifying sheet resistance and see if it falls within our acceptable range. And after this, we have a pass-fail decision, where if it's failed, it's discarded. And if it's passed, this is material that can end up being passed on to our customers. So here I show example Raman from a sample from our production run. The average Raman spectra is shown at the top there. And for every Raman every production that we sample, we actually collect thousands of Raman spectra in a map format. So there below is a more statistical histogram of extracted D to G ratios, which again is indicative of defect density. And what we show here is a relatively narrow distribution that's low. And so we have strict metrics where we're seeking a D to G ratio below 0.06. We also sample between different production runs. So we want to ensure that we're offering repeatable and reliable quality over time. So this shows another histogram of D to G ratios extracted over many different production runs. We see a narrow distribution of these properties, which means we're reliably producing and providing a low defect concentration in our material. As I mentioned, we collect a lot of SEM images as part of this quality control process. Here are a couple examples of SEM images that you may see for our material. From this, we extract things like multilayer content. On the right here, you see another histogram showing the extracted multilayer from our production runs. Actually, we find a median coverage of 0 for these regions that we sample. However, our specs for our multilayer content allow us to go up to about 5% multilayer in coverage. And of course, we extract electrical properties from our transferred graphene material. Here's again another histogram showing distributions that we get from our production runs. And in general, we see an average sheet resistance of about 500 ohms per square. And so we're aiming to provide consistent graphene that you can use as a great platform for building your sensors or working with other applications. And so our graphene quality, we actually find to be equivalent to a more controlled batch process in a tube furnace, but we actually find that we have greater repeatability in our industrial scale CVD system. And we have many collaborators in the academic and industrial space who have confirmed our graphene quality to be as good or better than many reputed provider. So this is something that we're quite proud of. Quickly, I want to give a flavor about like how we do process control on our CVD system. So up at the top there, you see a rendering of our system. It's a very complex CVD system in the sense that we have hundreds of gas injection sites, tens of different thermal zones. And really with this complexity, we need to adopt a more empirical approach for our optimization. So generally, we let the data guide our adjustments. So this actual figure that you're seeing here, these are extracted D to G ratios for our production material as a function of time. And so this plot actually represents millions of hundreds of thousands to millions of individual Raman spectra. And what you can see is, going back in time, we might have a little more deviation in the properties of our material. We'll undergo some sort of R&D optimization event. And we start to see narrowing of our distribution of D to G ratios. And what this means is that we're providing material now at a greater yield that meets our quality control metrics as denoted by that blue dotted line there, which is kind of our upper control limit for our process control. Additionally, you see another event where we've undergone optimization in our system. We see even more narrowing of our D to G ratio, so even less defects consistently with our material. And really, this is important because as we increase the yield of our production process, this means that we can pass on a lower cost of production to our customers. And in general, I think many of our customers find that they can actually purchase graphene from us cheaper than maintaining their own CVD systems. So some examples of what we might use for our statistical process control to keep our production under control would be we vary process control conditions. So this can be the different temperatures, flow rates of gases, and here's just a couple arbitrary conditions and the distribution of how this affects the defect density of our subsequent graphene. We've also explored many different copper catalysts to find options that allow us to provide the most consistent material, and we explore things like production rate. So one thing we want to highlight in this presentation is we have a fair degree of tunability of different carbon products that we can produce. So for anything that we're going to produce, we undergo some sort of synthesis optimization. And this might be controlling, temperature of our growth process, gas composition, time, as well as the substrates that we actually grow the material on. And for the people in the audience who are familiar with, carbon Raman spectra, you see here at the bottom, the Raman spectra showing we can produce monolayer graphene, multi-layer graphene, or more akin to graphite, or something more akin to an amorphous carbon, like our pyrolytic carbon product. So here's a matrix that kind of helps explain this. We have kind of on this y-axis here, different catalysts, and across the x-axis, different dimensionalities of this catalyst. So if we're working with like a two-dimensional carbon film, we use this to produce monolayer graphene. So here we show just an optical image of transferred monolayer graphene. If we're working with a two-dimensional nickel foil, this is what we use to produce our multi-layer graphene. If we're working with a two-dimensional refractory material, this is something that we can't typically produce graphene on, but we can deposit our pyrolytic carbon coatings, which have their own applications. So an example would be we can deposit a pyrolytic carbon on an alumina substrate, which is used for electrochemical electrodes, which Siddhant will touch on here in a moment. If you look at three-dimensional nickel, this is something we can use as a template to grow a graphene foam product, which again, Siddhant will touch on. And three-dimensional refractory materials, we can, like a tube, for example, we can deposit a relatively uniform pyrolytic carbon coating. So you see, we have a lot of tunability in the carbon products that we produce, and we try to provide carbon suited for our customers' needs. And so that brings up Shri from Hememics, who can give a little more information about collaborative efforts that we've had with their great team there at Hememics.
Thanks, Michael. Hi. So Hememics is focused on developing a 100 multiplex biosensor platform. So what we essentially do is we develop a test for a particular target that can be very mobile. The test is pretty quick. We can target essentially mostly two kinds of molecules, small molecules and proteins, but we have previously worked with, we could detect nucleic acid, So for example, it could be something like a test that detects toxins or drugs of abuse or herbicides for agricultural applications. So what we are focused on is how to develop an economical, sensitive, and a very fast test. Can go to the next slide, Mike. So one thing we portray here is detection of ricin protein. So this is a weaponizable biowarfare agent. So these are extracts from castor beans that can be used as weapons. So what we demonstrate here is detection of this molecule in mud. This is done in the context of making a very quick 5-minute test. So this test is, we use graphene on a polymer substrate. And for this test, the recognition molecule that we use is an aptamer. And what we demonstrate here is the selectivity versus a similar biotoxin called SCB. And this is done in a fairly, a matrix that's pretty rough. So mud samples are mixed with spiked ricin, and then the user mixes a buffer with the sample, and it goes through a very gross filter. So something that can be done in the field, and we drop it on the chip itself. So the test demonstrates like a picomolar sensitivity here, but it's the general range which we detect is in the range of picomolar to nanomolar, and we have set this up so that we can have multiple targets that can be detected from a single chip as such. Next one. So how do we work with General Graphene has been a close collaborator for a while now. So we developed the substrate onto which the graphene is transferred. General Graphene grows the graphene and transfers it onto the substrate. When we develop the tests in a panel. So our typical sensor has 24 or 32 sensors. So we send this panel to General Graphene. They transfer the graphene for us. It comes back to us. We do the rest of the processing in-house. So for each panel that comes to us, they do their quality control, which Michael kind of went in fair detail. From our side, we track, so each board we track together during transfer if there's any observations that were made. When we do our manufacturing, we track them pretty closely with an in-house system. And for each sensor and each board that's tested, so we take care to track from the beginning to the end, and we share data with each other. So we have our internal testing metrics that we share with General Graphene. So we have some quality control steps that comes during the before we add the biology on the chip. Those data typically get shared with them so that they can improve their process, figure out any issues we have on it. And we are also developing tools that we can send to General Graphene where they can, when the panel is developed, before even biology or further processing is done, this panel can be quality control. So that's how we have been closely working. So they have been great partners for us because as we develop an internal process, we try to leverage what General Graphene's processes so that kind of we give them feedback. Their processes can also help us as such. So that's how we mostly work. Michael.
All right, thank you, Shri. I think echoing your words, Hememics and the partnership we've shared with you has been great, and I think we see great things coming in the future for you and your team. So, and really have value and enjoy the relationship we've shared. So I'll be now moving on to touch on some of the markets we work in. So, of course, and we provide material to these markets, whether it's graphene or carbon films. So on the biosensor side of things, of course, as Sri described, big market for this, for the monolayer graphene product, is going to be the field effect transistor-based biosensors, which Sri and his team are working on. We also offer an alternative product that is more suited for electrochemical biosensing, really some measurements such as cyclic voltammetry or electrochemical impedance spectroscopy is what those platforms would be more attuned for. And then sticking within the biotech universe, but slightly different from sensing, is going to our graphene foam side of things. We are positioning that particular material as a scaffolding biomaterial for the cell culture market. And we'll touch more on why that material exhibits attractive properties and what those properties are here in a few moments. We also have a number of applications that we term as really this category of direct growth niche applications, many of which we are precluded from sharing details on due to non-disclosure agreements being in place. But a simple way to think of these applications is they involve graphene that is not transferred from its growth substrate, or carbon that is not transferred from its growth substrate. And then for our final bucket, we have research-driven applications, of which in graphene there are many, but some of the ones that we primarily work with collaborators in include optoelectronics, barrier films, areas like clean tech and membranes. So touching more on our approach across each of these markets, starting with the biosensors, which is, we're providing two products. More often than not, it's graphene on a substrate, very commonly a silicon wafer, which most of the folks we work with are using. And on the other side of things, on the electrochemical sensing side of things, we have the device or electrochemical device platform, which is closer to an end product relative to the graphene on substrate you're seeing right above it. We have strategic partnerships in this field, of course, with Hememics, who you've just heard from, also with Graphene DX, which is another company in the point of care space, developing platforms using our material. And really what positions us well in this field is offering two distinct materials for the market to cater to the FET-based and the electrochemical sensing modalities. And our competitive advantage primarily stems from the technology and how we're able to drive scalability and affordability for our partners. The cell culture side of things, and this has been a market which we've recently focused on in the last year and a half. We've had 10 plus collaborators in what is a relatively short time span. Currently have 3 long-term cell culture studies being planned on the material. And here in this particular market, we see an opportunity to grow rapidly and really see potential in our material to meet this distinct unmet need, which is serving as a better scaffold for the 3D cell culture market and enabling industry to move away from conventional 2D cell culture to a more complex and representative 3D cell culture modeling system. And then for our last bucket, we have research and niche applications, which we touched on a little bit previously. This market is segmented in 2 ways. Really, first way is talking more about our relationships with publicly traded multinational companies, of which we have 4 active relationships at this time. We also have an online storefront, which we launched 6 months ago, primarily catered to support graphene research projects with small to mid-volume graphene requirements being catered to. And here again, our advantage and benefits from working with us comes from what we've been able to achieve with our technology and capability suite, and how that drives affordability and provides the option for our customers to really look at large volumes, not just with graphene, but with a diverse array of products. So to touch more specifically on one of our 2 most recent developments, starting with the graphene scaffolds. So these are what we like to term as smart bioactive materials. And this is image is really something that a typical collaborator of ours in the cell culture space would expect to see the product in. Our graphene foam has features such as biocompatibility, which was recently validated with an independent lab per the ISO 10993-5 protocol. We also have what is a very biomimetic environment, so it's representative of how things occur at a biological level inside your body or in vivo conditions. The structure is highly porous, so you have pores that are on average of 250 micrometers, but some pores that range, from 50 all the way to 300 microns or 500 microns at the most. And what this porous structure does for the cell culture application is really give the material or give the cells adequate surface area to migrate and spread on the structure. And also provide adequate spacing for oxygen and nutrient transfer. But out of all these properties, perhaps what's the most unique property about our scaffold is the conductivity. And you may think conventionally that that is not a relevant property for stem cells, but there have been a variety of cell lines, specifically in fields such as neural and cardiovascular tissues, where it's been widely researched and documented that electric fields could be used to enhance cell growth, differentiation, and also help tissues mature faster. So really acting as a very novel therapeutic route. And this particular image is showing just some cells seated inside our graphene foam matrix. What makes our material unique is we offer this combination of conductivity and biocompatibility, which no other solution or biomaterial on the market offers today. Currently, from a research direction, which has been driven by our collaborators, we're exploring internally things like tuning the pore size, thickness, from our current 1.6 millimeters to varying values, and also looking at developing device architectures to leverage some of the unique properties, such as the conductivity of our material. In the last year and a half, we've had several tests performed by our collaborators. Biocompatibility, which we've been validated for. We've also been validated that we're not cytotoxic and offer a platform that supports enhanced stem cell growth and differentiation. And this has been observed not for one or two cell lines, but across a variety of specialized and unspecialized cells. So the specialized ones being things like cardiomyocytes, and then the unspecialized ones being more just fibroblasts or mesenchymal stem cells, which would then go on to differentiate into specialized cell types. So that touches on the scaffolding application for the cell culture and our material offering. Here, moving on to another recent development that was within the last year and a half, is the carbon electrochemical sensors, which we term as the C3 electrodes. And this is a three-system electrode that consists of a working and a counter electrode of CVD deposited carbon, and a reference electrode that's very commonly used one. It's a silver chloride based reference. And there's typically a measurement that you would see for a device like this. This is one of the measurements we've taken, which is the cyclic voltammetry. That technique is really used to characterize the oxidation and reduction events that occur, for a specific molecule of interest. And what we've observed as unique features about our platform is that we offer a high degree of chemical stability and resistance to solvents, especially organic solvents. Our carbon is CVD deposited, about 2 to 2.5 microns in thickness, and it contains the binders that would interfere with the signal of the device. The electrical interface or the resistance of the interface is fairly low, owing to the CVD nature of the deposition, and it's also scratch resistant and biocompatible, which opens up for long-term durable applications in medical devices. The device does not require any pre-treatment before being used, and operates with what is a very wide electrochemical potential window. And so far, just from our work with collaborators in the field, the validation that we've received is our devices have improved reproducibility compared to screen printed carbon and graphene electrodes, which are very common in this market. We also offer a more cost-effective platform compared to things like thin film gold electrodes. So that is something that we've heard back as feedback from collaborators. And really, to wrap this all up, today we touched on our journey over the years, really starting with a focus on synthesizing graphene and moving more on to not just making graphene, but other carbon-based nanomaterials, but making that now for specific applications instead of just manufacturing. And really, what our emphasis has evolved towards in the last year and a half has been how do we seamlessly integrate what we make across end applications, and it's through partnerships like the ones we share with Sri at Hememics, is that we've had the closer collaboration model with our customers, and that's when we've seen the best chances of success for a partnership. And looking forward, this is something that we see in our horizon is more and more collaborations. We love working with people and seeing how we can support you to conceptualize and realize your ideas with graphene and thin film carbons. And our focus remains on expanding, our customer base across the world with our diversified range of products, which you're seeing up on the screen, include all the way down from single atom thick carbon with our monolayer graphene to things like the graphene foam and the carbon electrode, which are many atom thick carbon structures. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and thanks to Terence for organizing this wonderful session. And now we'd love to answer some questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Fantastic, Siddhant, Michael, and Srivastava. Thank you for a great presentation. Just a couple of initial observations from my side, and then we'll jump into the questions. And you can stop the share, and we'll just have a chat. First of all, I just want to second or highlight the fact that where we've seen successful applications, in particular using graphene in these biomedical application areas with sensors and technology, has been close collaboration between a producer and a user. So I'd like to ask Sri a couple of questions. First of all, it's kind of a loaded question. How revolutionary is it to go to like a carbon-based sensing structure as opposed to traditionally it's been metallics or some other service? What has been the unique difference in using this particular material for your sensing application?
I have a little bit of a longer perspective here. In my grad school and my previous experiences, I've worked with impedance spectroscopy-based gold sensors, all different kinds of sensors based on usually metals that are very rare or very expensive electrodes and so on. So the issue with sensing is typically how do you make it economical to the target market? What the industry hasn't achieved at this point of time is have a portable point of care platform that can also somewhat multiplex and be very reliable. The other part of the equation is how do you develop this test in an economical format? Because the market can only absorb a certain amount of development costs. So carbon, at least from our perspective, monolayer carbon is pretty much the only nanomaterial that's accessible. And thanks to companies like General Graphene, the cost of carbon has become a lot lower. So this is a nanomaterial that's accessible thanks to collaborators that are easy to manufacture. So you can make sensors that are relatively inexpensive in certain markets that we can pursue. And we get all the advantages of it being a nanomaterial without the cost of production as such, where nanomaterial production itself has its own cost. So that's been a game changer for us. And that's how we started as a company that would preserve proteins. And we looked at applications, and that's how we evolved into making sensors. And we have previously worked with carbon nanotubes, graphene on silicon. We have explored quite a few things. For us, graphene on plastic especially makes a huge bit of difference.
Thank you for that comment. And that kind of, there's so many things to talk about here. One is, first of all, I think it's a tremendous technological achievement for General Graphene to be able to make this monolayer graphene on such a large format and scale and the roll-to-roll process. The second observation I would make is the transfer technology, is the ability to put this on a polymer is, as you mentioned, game-changing. It makes it accessible for the sensing. But there's another aspect I want to talk about. When you're talking about sensors, and especially point-of-care devices, then the question is scale. So there are a lot of companies that can demonstrate, a graphene-based sensor as a pilot or as an R&D project. But then when you want to get into production, you're talking about millions of devices typically. Can you talk a little bit about, why this particular technology is suited for a large-scale application?
So for us, from our perspective, there are a couple of aspects. One is internally, when you look at papers or even small companies, they tend to do a couple of, I would say, 100 tests and then demonstrate detection and manufacturability. What we have focused on is we try not to do anything that doesn't scale. So when we do tests in the lab, we try to keep focus on the thesis that we have to manufacture an economical test. So if there is a process and there are three options, one is scalable, you can buy off-the-shelf equipment. So I can buy a tiny one that I can do on the desk, but I can pick up a credit card and buy a machine that can make it at much larger 10x scale. We always try to focus on that. So that has been our core thesis. So coming back, preservation is one thing. So we have focused on making sure that not only that we can code biology on graphene, but that we can also preserve it, dry preserve it, so that it's like a COVID test you can peel. That's one aspect of it. The second is, how do you manufacture these sensors? Like, how reproducible are they? And can you see that the challenges in manufacturing, even at your R&D stage, and can you overcome that? Because it costs a lot to fix problems when you go to pilot and hire, rather than trying to address the problem more systematically. And third is the tools. The tools for manufacturing should be something that's probably available off the shelf for the most part. We try to focus on technologies that we can try it in a small fashion, but we know down the lane that companies have put in a lot of effort to develop those tools, tools that can scale. And lastly, graphene itself, the capacity that General Graphene has is fairly sufficient for us, even to address our first customer and so on. So,
understood. Yes, scalability, selectivity, repeatability, these are all really very important then for these kind of sensing applications. I want to go to some of the questions that we have from the audience today. So the first one here is, it's more of a technical question to talk about the thickness, porosity, and electrical conductivity in the graphene foam material. And the other question, is it suitable to use as an electrode for supercapacitors, for example? That isn't really one of the applications. I know a lot of graphene is going into energy storage devices, either batteries and such, and I didn't see that, which doesn't surprise me knowing the kind of material you make. But do you want to address that? Because obviously batteries are getting a lot of attention today.
Sure, I can take a stab at this one. So our current graphene foam, generally the thickness of the foam itself is 1.6 millimeters in thickness. The actual graphene that is used to compose the foam is more on the order of tens of layers of graphene. So it's kind of that mini layer to thin graphite range. So the porosity of the material is generally quite porous. I think it's over 99% porous. This is one that we have spec sheets on, and I'd encourage you to reach out to us so we can share more specific details with you. But the electrical conductivity of the actual carbon, in this form is going to be similar to what you would expect of graphite. So kind of the 10 to the 5th Siemens per meter scale. And is it suitable as an electrode for supercapacitors? This is a space that we're not necessarily targeting with this material, but it checks some of the key criteria, being conductive with a large surface area. One thing about this material is it has such a low density, that putting it into appropriate form factor for a lot of supercapacitor applications, I think could be a challenge. But I think it's definitely possible, and something that I'd encourage you to reach out to us about if you're interested.
I think the only thing I would add to that is we've had, this is one, as Michael said, we don't necessarily explore this as a focus area, just because of how energy storage looks like generally, I think, for the range of materials we're making. But we've had a few groups approach us for the specific application. And I'm in fact working with one research group on this area. So if it's something that you're interested in, echoing Michael's comments, reach out to us and we can provide more details.
Thank you both. Just to make a general comment, we often see people, say, send me a sample because I want to work on this and test it out. And I would say in my 10 plus years of experience now working with graphene and other materials, that almost never works out. It almost always has to be a collaboration between the producer so that they can tweak it and adjust it to your end application, and for the end user to really understand the material. This is a case, I think, in the relationship with Hememics is a good example of it, where both parties have their expertise and both need each other to come to a successful product or application. So if you do reach out, please anticipate working with General Graphene on your application in kind of a co-development kind of method, and not just say, hey, send me a sample and let me play with it, which is tempting, but that rarely results in a joyous execution. There's another technical question here. Doing the CVD process under atmospheric pressure is suggested from the questioner to produce more stress on carbon deposition and can create more defects. Obviously, with the quality control process, and by the way, Michael, I was very impressed with the quality control process you have both with the Raman and with the optical spectroscopy or the optical microscopy that you do. I don't know if you can answer this question because they're asking, how did you solve the problem? And that's kind of the heart of your IP, isn't it?
It is. I can give a few details. We've worked a lot with, prior to, I would say, the setup of our industrial scale system, we work a lot with tube furnaces, atmospheric pressure depositions there. So, a lot of what was learned in that format could be applied to our industrial scale design of our system. And then, I will say that there's aspects of our CVD growth that, I touched on the complexity of our system and how we have to take a more empirical approach to optimization. And one of the reasons why, this point kind of resonates with us here is that some of the things that are, I would say, kind of our IP that we don't want to disclose are not just non-intuitive, but sort of counterintuitive to the literature space for overcoming some challenges and reducing defect concentration. So I'll say a lot of it's driven by these empirical approaches of large data sets, working through a lot of material, and then applying, statistical process control methods to hone in on what gives us the best result.
Yeah. I don't know the exact age. I think it's well over a decade, though, of work that's gone into getting you to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. There's another question here on the quality control aspect of it, is where the Raman spectra are captured. Is it the graphene's on the copper substrate, on silicon dioxide or silicon, or is it even on the polymer? I think from your presentation, as I understood, it was on both the polymer and on the copper. Is that right?
So yeah. So our typical quality control that we're using, we find that the Raman on copper, although possible, we're not satisfied with the signal to noise because of this photoluminescent kind of copper background peak. Right. So our quality control process is quite intensive in the sense that we're typically transferring it off to a silicon wafer. So like a full wet transfer that many people would be familiar with. where we then do Raman mapping and that type of thing on the actual sample. So silicon wafers are our most common substrate that we work with there.
Got it. And what about on a polymer when you transfer to a polymer? Are you testing it there as well?
So the one issue that we run into with the polymers is some overlapping peaks that might exist with the polymeric substrates. So typically our primary source of quality control on polymer will end up being imaging as well as electrical characterization. And really, if we're looking at the Raman, primarily we focus on doing it on the silicon oxide silicon wafer.
Excellent. I do want to take the opportunity here to let the audience know that as the Graphene Council and now as the Advanced Carbon Council, we've worked on standards for characterization of graphene, and that includes a separate set of test methods for monolayer graphene, which will be published by ISO. That should be by the end of next month. So there is a graphene characterization classification framework that's been submitted to ISO and has now gone through the entire review process and will be published as an official technical specification. I just wanted, sorry to steal the thunder, guys, but I just wanted to share that because that's a lot of work that went into that. And it's important that we have standards for this industry as well as for the other allotropes of carbon so the customer knows what they're getting. And there's a consistent way of measuring and characterizing and reporting those values. So the next question, I think this would be for Sri, regarding the ricin aptamer. Is it actually attached to the graphene itself or to the polymer? I think I know the answer to that one, but can you just talk to us about the architecture of where the aptamer is attached and how that functions and what role the graphene plays, I would ask.
So basically, as I think Siddharth mentioned later in the presentation, so what we make is essentially a biofed with the graphene as a conduction channel. So what we essentially have is patches of graphene in a microarray format for all practical purposes. And then we have this aptamer attached on top of graphene. And what you expect in a biofed is usually you have a gate. We have a gate. So we can deposit each of these sensors individually. So we can have a couple of sensors for ricin, a couple of sensors for SEB, a couple of sensors for some other toxin. And along with that, we can also detect, let's say, some other small molecule in the same sample. So what we bring is we have a single chip that can typically detect quite a diverse class of molecules. But we typically want to work with a customer who knows that area pretty well. And there's a need, we work with the customer to figure out there's a need for a test and there's an economics for the test, and we kind of focus on that. But graphene is, the aptamer is on the graphene itself, not on the plastic.
Understood. I think the field you're working on is just set up for massive growth because there are more and more pathogens that need to be tested. I mean, now we have bird flu, which is transferring now to other species. And, just the arc is that there are always going to be new pathogens that need to be tested. And for community health, early detection and rapid detection and to be able to deploy to a wide population is really important. So these low-cost multiplexing sensing applications, I think, are really, really going to find a market, and they're needed for community health. There is a question, I don't know if it's commercially sensitive, but what kind of volume do you see for your applications?
That's probably a little more complicated to answer, but we expect to manufacture millions of tests once we get into pilot manufacturing pretty soon. I mean, when we look at a sector, the way we look at it is we address small markets where we do pretty well and then kind of grow out of that, less regulated to more regulated markets. For example, we have done about 300,000 sensors worth of tests in the last year or two. So we do lots of volume even in-house for our development. So we expect a significant number, but that's a little bit complicated to discuss.
No problem. Any of these point of care devices are in the millions of units. So that's That's quite typical.
And also, just to add, even the reader that we make, we can make a headless reader with a screen that can be like a fob-sized device. So we have made it so that it can get into a home for a very attractive price as such.
Awesome. And a question for General Graphene. There's a couple of questions. If any of these type of materials you've produced have been used for haptic sensors.
Yeah, not to our knowledge, Terrence. This is unless a university or a research institution has come to us and hasn't told us, because we have some customers on that proportion that just really buy the material as a raw material. And unless we kind of take that conversation forward and really it's driven on what the customer is looking for and move towards the more closer collaboration, we wouldn't be privy to that sort of information. So think not from any of our close collaborations is what I would say for the haptic sensors.
I'm going to skip to a couple of the other questions here, and then I think we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. But the electrical conductivity you mentioned, the visual inspection, and the Raman spectroscopy you mentioned, have you measured for thermal conductivity? And even if so, what applications would need the thermal conductivity for a film so thin as CVD, very few layer or single layer graphene?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, thermal conductivity measurements are outside of our, wheelhouse of what we're measuring internally. And I think you're touching on, one of the key points when it comes to monolayer graphene is, although it has its exceptional thermal conductivity, still it has a large thermal resistance in general, with it being a monolayer thick material. So that's one that we don't measure a lot of thermal properties. And we don't measure any thermal properties, I would say, internally. In terms of the use for thermal applications, we're certainly open to working with any of our customers that want to explore this space. The area that I think that we see more direct applicability would be in some of the carbon formats that we offer that are thicker, be it the multi-layer graphene or potentially even a foam structure is where I see the most potential, at least.
Yeah, I think for the modular side of things, just to add quickly, just some folks that have used it for flexible heating applications and heat dissipation coatings. I think those are two fields where we've had some experience or conversations, at the very least. But we found that for the heating application, your cost has to be, I think, relatively low to compete with existing materials. So that's where that goes back to, I guess, Michael's point of having something that's more for pyrolytic carbon coating. And for that particular substrate, we've also done some work tuning the transparency as a function of how thick the coating is. And that has a knock-on effect. Of course, it's one of the neat optimization tricks that our team does. Is that having some sort of effect on the thermal conductivity and resistivity of the material? So see more potential, I think, in the alternative formats, but not as much so in the monolayer side of things.
That makes sense. I think if I could try to summarize this, because there's so much information about graphene, and rightfully so, and so much interest because it has strength and thermal conductivity, electrical conductivity, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very interesting material, but it's not, you really have to have the right material for the particular application. And I think in your application, one really has to look at high value add rather than bulk cheap materials where you get a good addition. There's a question here about the volume, how much weight versus size and everything else. When it comes to monolayer graphene, I always tell people you could almost literally count the atoms that you're using in a particular device. You're using such a small amount. What's not important is the volume of carbon that's being used. What's important is the format of the small amount of material that you're using for the particular application. And this is really highlighted in the sensing and medical diagnostic equipment. That's what's important. So what's important is what's your cost per unit to apply and use graphene as an enabling technology and material to get to the sensitivity, the speed of reaction, and selectivity in these sensing devices to give you a next generation capability with, especially with medical sensors. As we close here, I just want to say thank you. We really appreciate having General Graphene as a member of the Advanced Carbons Council and the Graphene Council for many years. We encourage any companies out there that have an interest in these materials to engage with us. If you like, we're a neutral, independent platform. And if you have especially any questions about how the techniques that General Graphene has developed to produce this material consistently at volume, and how it could apply to your particular use case, just reach out to them and talk to them and explore it, and they can answer that. So before we conclude, I'd like to ask Sri and Mike and Siddhant if you have any closing comments do you like to share with our audience, and then we'll conclude today's webinar. With Sri?
Sure. No, this has been like for us, it's been a long journey where we have worked closely with General Graphene. We have been focusing on developing a platform that can deliver what has been promised for biosensors for quite some time. We first focus on scale and economics because that's been the biggest hurdle, how to make sensors. We need sensitivity, selectivity, absolutely. But what's been missing is that. So what has enabled, this collaboration has helped us develop that aspect so that we can start working with our early customers who can take this to their customers, who is kind of where we'll see an impact. This has been very wonderful.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience, because it's great to hear your voice as a customer and a user of these materials. That's really important. So thank you for sharing your time with that.
Thank you.
Michael and Siddhant?
Maybe I'll give a couple quick words. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. If you have interest in our materials, please feel free to reach out to us. Ultimately, we want to help our customers because helping them helps us. And so, yeah, by all means, feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo very quickly of Michael's comments. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out for schedules to attend, and for Terrence for organizing this wonderful session. We're always open to collaborate with folks, and are very eager to see how this field progresses. Graphene's completed 2 decades very recently, and we're sure that there are a lot of exciting things ahead in the field, and very eager to support partners on the technology and application side of it, and with our various products and platforms, really work very closely with them to ensure success, because what's good for graphene is good for us all. And yeah, we'll close with that.
That's a great last word. Thank you all very much. Everybody take care. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.